And unfortunately, there is so much misinformation out there from online forums and often, unfortunately, from teachers about what makes a good or a very good and a very bad personal statement. So students are often misdirected to write personal statements that aren't as good as they could write. And unfortunately, the way that's done perpetuates pre-existing social inequalities, because the better the school you go to, the more likely the teachers are to know exactly how to kind of master the personal statement formula, whereas the worse school you go to, the more likely that's not the case. So what we really see is the personal statement just perpetuating pre-existing inequalities, which is really unfortunate, and which is why we started UniRise.
Thanks for joining us today at GenZ Talks. I'm your host, Dan Sullivan, and I'm going to be presenting Season 3, Episode 1 of GenZ Talks Around the World. And today we've got a great first episode lined up for you. We're going to be discussing the topic of university, looking at what value university still offers students today, as well as how students can stay ahead of the competition when applying for their dream university. Kicking off Season 3 is a special guest from the UK. He's the co-founder and COO of an amazing initiative called UniRise. UniRise is supporting students with personal statements and is leveling the playing field, enabling students from all backgrounds to have a greater chance of getting into their dream university. To discuss this and other issues focused around university, I'm pleased to welcome our first guest of Season 3, Oliver Rutherford. Welcome, Ollie.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here, Dan.
Hey, thanks for joining us. And maybe, Ollie, you could give us a brief introduction as to what you've been doing the last few months, year, and then we can dive deep into the questions.
Sure, yeah. So I suppose mid to late last year, I co-founded a social enterprise called UniRise, where our mission really is to ensure that every single student, particularly students from disadvantaged backgrounds, have the tools and the support and the mentorship available for them to both figure out what they want to study and where, and then kind of smash their UCAS application and get into their first choice university.
Regarding university, Ollie, it's obviously come under scrutiny for what value students are getting from uni, particularly now. But looking at some stats that UCAS published in March last year, there's actually been a 17% increase from applicants compared to the previous year. Why do you think that might be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I suppose I'm in two minds about this, because on the one hand, the value of the university degree is a lot less than it used to be. So, in our parents' generation, having a university degree was like a huge deal, which would enable you to get a much better job than if you didn't have a university degree. And as through really the internet, knowledge has been consistently more and more democratized. You can now access everything pretty much for free as long as you have a Wi-Fi connection. So anything you learn at uni, you can just watch on a YouTube video. Or if you want more structure, you can watch on a MOOC. So things like Coursera and edX, you can watch all of these things pretty much for free and get access to the best quality professors and academics in the world, just through your screen. So it is surprising to see applications for university increasing. I think one reason why university applications have increased, and I don't know the answer to this, to be honest with you, is firstly, a lot of students do feel pressure from their parents to apply to university, because that's kind of what was done in their time. And if you don't go to university, you might not make your parents proud. I also think a lot of kind of people in their late teens are realizing how challenging the job market is right now and how difficult it is to set yourself apart. And by having an undergraduate degree, even masters as well, is just going up and up. It just gives you another kind of box ticked that can help you differentiate yourself against other people in the same field as you. Having said that, like I mentioned at the start, having a degree doesn't give you that differentiation like it used to one day. So I often actually encourage people to think of alternatives to university if they think that university doesn't suit them. And I don't think that it's the be all and end all. I suppose the final thought there is, despite everything I've just said, it's still clear that if you do go to university in the UK, your lifetime earnings is on average a lot higher than your lifetime earnings if you don't go to university. So for men, it's about £168,000 throughout your lifetime. You'll earn more if you'd have gone to uni. And for women, it's over £250,000 over a lifetime if you'd have gone to uni. So if you're 18 and you're thinking, oh, 250 grand, that's quite a lot, then perhaps university seems like a good investment.
Regarding the competition for places, as a result of, the increase in applicants, what are the biggest challenges today for students to get into their dream university, their first choice university?
I think the first thing to say is that it's actually unfortunately become more difficult during COVID. So in, I think, November last year, 2020, the government released a survey saying that 20% of current year 13s, because of COVID, in a survey stated that they would defer their university entrances to the following year, mainly because they don't want to go to uni when it's online. They want to go to halls of residence. They want to have a good time, which makes a lot of sense. 20% is about 120 to 160,000 students, which essentially means that the current year 12s are going to have even more competition applying to university, assuming that statistic is correct. I don't know if it is, because obviously things are changing all the time. So firstly, it's becoming more difficult to apply to university just because, or not to apply, but to get in, because competition is increasing. I think the second thing, and again, I work mainly with students from more lower income backgrounds, there are misconceptions around kind of the cost of university. The UK has many problems with its university application system, and I'm actually finishing a master's on it in the next week or two, kind of discussing all of those issues and how they can be improved. But one thing that is quite good compared to lots of countries is that you can get a student loan. So the 9,000 whatever you pay a year, if you're a UK student, you don't have to actually pay yourself. You can get a loan from the government, and then you only start paying it back as soon as you start earning just over £20,000 to £23,000 a year. And then the more you earn, the higher percentage you pay back. So I think the way people should think about university, often they say, oh, it's too expensive. And it might be the case if you have to work like a part-time job whilst at university to support yourself. And many people had to do that. I did that myself for a while. But it's not, a lot of people get turned off because they're told it's too expensive. And I think there are ways to kind of mitigate the financial burdens of university, which we can maybe talk about later as well.
Yeah.
The next struggle students have is there's almost 400 higher education institutions in the UK and over 50,000 courses. So it's kind of like choice overload. It's like when you go to the supermarket and you want to eat hummus, and there's like 50 different types of hummus. There's like pine nut hummus and, saffron hummus. And you're just like, oh my God, I can't do with all of this. Just give me normal hummus. It's a little bit like that, but much worse when it comes to universities, because all of these universities are trying to sell to you their degree, because by you going there, you're paying them anywhere between 30 and £100,000 over your 3 or 4 years there. So that choice is really difficult. And a lot of students get overwhelmed by that and think, screw it, I'm just not even going to bother. I don't even know what I want to study. I don't know what I'm good at. I could do this degree, but if I don't like it, I don't want to drop out and then have to pay even more. So there are lots of issues around figuring out what to study and then where to study. If I finally decided I want to do economics, where should I apply? Should I apply to Oxford and Cambridge? Should I apply to Bristol or Durham or UCL or Manchester or Newcastle or Dundee or Portsmouth? It's really difficult to figure that out. So I think that's the kind of the third issue. And the final one is how to get in. And that is, cut me off, by the way, whenever you want. And that's probably the trickiest bit, which is actually the application takes in your GCSEs and your references from your teachers. But the main thing with most universities and most subjects is the personal statement. And unfortunately, there is so much misinformation out there from online forums and often, unfortunately, from teachers about what makes a good or a very good and a very bad personal statement. So students are often misdirected to write personal statements that aren't as good as they could write. And unfortunately, the way that's done perpetuates pre-existing social inequalities, because the better the school you go to, the more likely the teachers are to know exactly how to kind of master the personal statement formula, whereas the worse school you go to, the more likely that's not the case. So what we really see is the personal statement just perpetuating pre-existing inequalities, which is really unfortunate, and which is why we started UniRise.
How did it come about, UniRise, Ollie?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my partner in crime is called Andrew Mitz, and maybe he can share his story another time. But from my perspective, so when I finished university, I did teach first. So I ended up teaching in quite a challenging school in London where somewhere between 75 and 80% of students were on free school meals or pupil premium. And most of these students were just incredible, but they wrote awful personal statements. And even though I didn't know that much about it myself, when they shared it to me, I thought, oh my God, this is just like really bad. Even though they've got good grades, even though they're actually really passionate about the subject, there's no way they're getting in. And I suppose what scared me was that at the time, their teachers and head of sixth form had actually reviewed their personal statements and they were about to send it off. So I kind of got a bit concerned. How could it be the case that students, despite having had their statements viewed by actual teachers, were going to send off this kind of stuff? And then at the same time, I was talking to friends from other state schools who are teachers who are sharing the same thing. And then someone called Stephen Jones, who's like my favorite researcher in the world, released a study showing he released multiple studies, but one of them really got to me, and it basically showed how 75% of teachers from state schools gave judgments on personal statements that were contrary to the judgments that admissions tutors made. So what essentially that means is 3 out of the 4 times. So if they were both to review a personal statement, a teacher and an admissions tutor from a university, the person who actually decides if someone gets in or not, 3 out of 4 times, one will think it's good, and the teacher might think it's good, and the admissions tutor thinks it's bad, or vice versa. Yeah. So that's really, really scary. If the person you're getting the advice from is essentially wrong 3 out of 4 times based on that study, with a sample size of I think 44, but so it could be a bigger sample size, but it's also consistent with what I've seen in my work. So at the same time, I'd started lecturing at UCL as a kind of guest lecturer, and I ended up becoming friends with some admissions tutors, and they were telling me, oh yeah, Ollie, this is just, whenever we see a personal statement, it's obvious to us within 5 seconds if they've gone to a state school and private school. And so often, even though we can tell the state school student wants to study here, it's just not up to scratch compared to the private school student who's written a great personal statement. So, and also that in combination with the fact that the personal statement is really, really important. Some admissions tutors say it's up to about 80% importance of the whole application, because GCSEs you do when you're quite young, so it doesn't matter that much as long as it's good enough. References are really biased. And it's different with things like Oxbridge and medicine where you have interviews, but for most universities, it's probably the most important thing. It seemed to me like it's crazy how this one-page application is essentially the biggest determinant of the student's success, and it's not fair that students from richer backgrounds can write better ones than poorer ones. So long story short, we got 20 admissions tutors from top universities to review about 300 personal statements that our students, Andrew and my students, had sent us, and we got them to, like, on a Google Doc, review everyone and say what's good and what's bad and how it can be better. Then during last summer, we kind of sat down for a couple of weeks with all of these statements and reviews, and we figured out, okay, we actually now know exactly what they're looking for. They all kind of said the same things pretty much in terms of what they like, what they don't like, what distinguishes good and outstanding and good and bad and mediocre. And then based on that, we thought to ourselves, what is the most leveraged way that we can build something, a kind of technology platform that can create equality of opportunity? Because there are some great projects like Project Access and all sorts of mentorship programs that are fantastic with one-to-one mentorships, but you can't have 100,000 mentors. At least that's not an operation that I don't think I'd be able to run. So can we build something that can be scaled to reach the hands of every disadvantaged student? So we basically built a really, I think, high quality online course that takes students all the way from firstly, what should they even study and where, and helping them through that process, all the way to how they can write the best quality personal statement. And in that, we've built like an interactive personal statement builder that takes students through that whole process. So far, since launching in September, we've had just over 6,000 students take our online course, which is really, really exciting. And we've worked with dozens and dozens of state schools around the country to work with teachers to actually help them understand exactly what admissions tutors are looking for. And this year, in the next 24 months, we're hoping to make that 100,000 students, to the point where actually we render the personal statement insignificant, because no matter where a student's from, they know how to write an amazing personal statement. And that's really the aim of UniRise, is to get rid of the personal statement, which sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it's what we want to do.